Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is your host, Eric, and today I'm joined by an extreme leader in the game. I'll call him that. He's 32 years as a sworn law enforcement professional. Now he's very much still in it, maybe arguably in a bigger, more impactful way, an influential way. But without delaying it too much, Jim Dudley, Chief Retired DC Jim Dudley, thanks for coming on the show today.
Hey, my pleasure, Eric. Good to see you.
Yeah, absolutely. So just for the audience, a little recap is for those that don't know, I don't know how you're missing it, but Jim's name is, man, it's been in PoliceOne. It's been in so many law enforcement sources and resources, media for years and years. And you can even tell us how long you've been in that kind of extracurricular game, but certainly a powerful voice and influential one in our space.
Oh, thanks, Eric. I appreciate that and the kind introduction. You know, I grew up in San Francisco and in a era of the 70s where violence and crime were just really starting to hit its stride. We had so many incidents involving the Zodiac and the zebra killings, and we had the Jim Jones church and all of that, and it was coming to a head. And some people were fearful around me, and I thought it would just really be exciting to get into the game of policing. And so I started out as an explorer with my local sheriff's department, transitioned into a reserve role, and then at 21, I joined up. Had to start at the San Francisco airport because when I took my test, I was colorblind, much to my amazement.
Isn't that a great way to find out?
Oh my God. And, you know, I'm sitting out in the reject line and asked the nurse, well, what does this mean? And she said, well, it means you're not going to be a cop. And that was the start of my career. Well, about 13 months later, I passed with the aid of a contact lens and started my journey 32 years with the San Francisco Police Department as a patrol officer for my first 10 years. Got into a fatal shooting in my 9th year, made inspector, we call them, in San Francisco PD, and did that for about 5 years. Promoted up to lieutenant, a couple of years at a station, watch commander for a station, then went to work for the chief in essentially our legal division to help protect officers there. And then made captain a couple of years later, captain of our juvenile division, investigations, crimes against children. Went to a district station, another district station, and then one of our brand new chiefs called me and said, hey, I want you to be a commander. And that's the rank above captain. That's a non-civil service rank. So you have to be picked by the chief. And I got some experience, commander of patrol, investigations again, and then special operations and homeland security. And then a few years later, just before retirement, I was made a deputy chief, again over special operations and our planning groups and horses, Hondas, boats, Marine unit, SWAT teams, homeland security, all the fun stuff. And it was a great way to finish my career again as deputy chief of patrol.
Man, fantastic. What a smorgasbord. Is there any type of cop that you didn't either serve alongside, or supervise?
Gosh, I think I had the full gamut of really hard chargers to, you know, social guys. And, you know, I've spoken at so many retirements, and usually I agree to speak for the ones that I really do admire and had the pleasure of working with. And that is that really rare combination of a hardworking cop, a good cop, but also someone who's good in social settings and they can talk their way out of an incident with people as opposed to going, right to use of force. And that's a rare, I think for me, it seems to be rare when you get someone who excels at all of that.
Hmm.
And so I've had the opportunity to work with so many of those. I've had so many great role models who did, model that kind of behavior and did my best to follow in their footsteps.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Yeah, what I was even getting at was just the sheer units and technical assignments. But yeah, you went there and as far as like people, right? Because there are all types of cops, and for those listening in, I know that there's a decent chunk of the audience that are just prospective or new cops that are wondering like, hey, how do I need to be? What do I need to build, as far as characteristics and traits, and we connected on a recruiting seminar for or webinar for Lexipol, and truly like one of my biggest takeaways either from the profession, working in it and alongside so many amazing individuals, and then in hiring is that it doesn't matter. Like we take and we need all types because the community we serve are all types, and we need the technical brains, we need the tacticians, we need the physical, we need the social, like just like you said, all types for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I'm hoping that we're making that shift from that cynical view of a career in law enforcement to something that's better. I mean, you're a great example of that, blue grit wellness, right?
Mm.
And you project so many positive messages. I know, so many others with a show or they write about it. And, when I first came in, the guys at the academy said, okay, you got it. The three B's. Remember the three B's. They're get in trouble: booze, broads, and bad debts.
Mm.
And then they went on to say that, when you start, you're going to be really cheerful and wanting to meet everybody and do good. And you're going to think everybody's great. And then 5 years in the job, you're going to realize that, yeah, you're a good guy and you want to do well. And there's a few a-holes out there. I'll just say jerks from now
Yeah,
on. So
yeah,
then,
that's fine.
so then he says another 10, 15 years, you realize that you're a good guy still, but mostly everybody out there, bad guys, are jerks. And then as you progress, you'll realize that other cops are jerks. And then towards the end of your career, you'll realize you're a jerk too. So I'm thinking, wow, this is my intro to law enforcement
Yeah, yeah,
at the academy. And I think things have gone so much better. We're doing such a great job. Not enough yet, but so much as far as from the very introduction into the police academy, uh, fitness, exercise, nutrition, and wellness. And so many agencies provide apps and people for you to talk to at the first sign, or not even at the first sign. I've heard like probably a dozen places now that have a mandatory wellness check-in with a psychologist. And I think that's great. And you could sit in there for your half hour and talk about baseball or football or what have you.
yeah, yeah.
And maybe you'll start to get into some real issues. But I think that check-in is so important. If we are so reactive and we only respond to somebody in crisis mode, man, we are so late to the game. So I love the fact that there's so much outreach now. And I just interviewed the CEO, Troy Anderson, of the wellness and safety side of the National Law Enforcement Officers Museum. And he's putting on some programs, and they have an award that they give to agencies. They look at a dozen or so agencies, and they give an award for wellness programs. And I think it's just so great to recognize them, and hopefully other agencies see and hear and try to emulate and do more.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you covered the expanse, and just to highlight that, because I think it's worth recognizing. You talked about your initial lessons or lay of the land into law enforcement land, and I certainly had something very similar. And I'll to pad the anonymity a little bit, I'll say one of my first trainers, one of my first lessons and insights into law enforcement, the trainer said there are two rules: one, everyone lies, and two, everyone's stupid. So even if they're not trying to lie, they're stupid, so they're probably lying. So his his takeaway was like this, big doe-eyed, young recruit or young
Yeah.
new officer, me being 21 years old or 22 maybe at the time, but just to say, hey, you can't trust everybody, which is an impactful lesson. However, how it was framed alongside lessons like never get married and never have kids, and it was very that archetypical, super salty cop. But yeah, I love how we have gotten to the space where hopefully, partially by me and so many other people saying is that if you're not allowing your people to work out on duty, then you're in the Stone Age. Like, get with the times, right? It's not even like fluffy, like fitness stuff. It is emotional regulation, it's stress management. If you're one of those really traditional folks that just wants people to have the best output, well, it's that too. And then, even like you mentioned, I love the highlight on mental health visits or check-ins or whatever agencies call them. I love the voluntary ones. I love a lot of the anecdotes I'm hearing about mandatory, and we are starting that for our new hires. So, and you even put it well, right? You don't have to say anything. You could shoot the breeze, but just to socialize someone in the industry that's going to probably recognize a time when they could really benefit from services like that. Maybe it's not even that care provider, right? Maybe it's not even that therapist or clinician, but just the fact that I have talked to a counselor or a psychologist at some point is definitely going to make it easier for me to transition into hitting somebody up in my time of need.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I want to kind of zigzag around. We talked about wellness, and maybe this is a good time to ask you because, 30 plus years in the industry, and you've been, I kind of brought up a lot of the PoliceOne work you've been doing as far as writing, contributing. You run a podcast alongside PoliceOne Lexipol. You're also a lecturer in a university setting. So many things. I know that there was some overlap with your active career, and then you're still wearing all these hats now. And for the listeners, because there isn't video, I think it's really pertinent to say you look well. You're a vibrant, energized, if they're not hearing it, like individual and leader. And I think that it is worth paying attention to folks like you who are modeling this level of engagement, positivity of the industry, because like you said, it's true. Like, there's so many people that get through law enforcement, and not to be judgmental of them because this experience is so stressful and it can be so tenuous. But my theory is that if we take care of things like wellness, things that we can address, we can build that resilience. And you're certainly someone that I see very outwardly resilient. So I just want to say that, and then also kind of peel back the onion and see what kind of nuggets that you've acquired maybe through the years and through your career to get you to this place.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that you mentioned resilience because that's my mantra these days. I know, so many people on social media are talking about how awful it is in their line of work and how broken they are, and the mention of PTSD, and I totally get that. Believe me, I've had some really tragic incidents happen with with law enforcement officers who worked at my department. Really tragic stories. Some where we had some inkling, others completely blindsided us. And I wish we had known more. I wish we could have reached out more. Um, I think our best efforts are at the earliest stages, and at the end, we're just trying to, uh, you know, push the ocean back, shovel sand back into the ocean. And we really need to do that outreach beforehand. And I love the fact that we're seeing more podcasts and social media spinning positive images rather than, I really don't know what the help is by somebody getting on and talking about how awful they are, how awful they
Mhm.
feel. And I always want to reach out and say, look, talk to me anytime, or call a therapist, or I can set you up with somebody in the industry that I know that might be able to help you. But I don't know if those pleas, and I think they are pleas over and over on social media. I don't know that they're that helpful.
Mm.
So, I hope those kinds of people get the help that they need, and I hope the response that they're getting is um, more encouraging. But the resilience is something that I really hope that we could bottle and put out there. For me, I don't know. Maybe I have undiagnosed ADD or ADHD, and I just have to be busy. But um, I do enjoy your podcast, other podcasts, movies. I don't read as much as I used to because I have to read for school sometimes.
Mm,
So my free time is golf, and I have a 5-year-old dog, Rottweiler German Shepherd. She's
love
just
it.
the sweetest, Soka, and my wife, and we have a cabin that we can escape to, and I have 2 sons in the industry. They're both cops, and they have awesome families. And I try to stay active to keep up with them. I think um, growing up in San Francisco, poor, or at least on the low economic side, single mom, and getting into law enforcement is the best job I ever had. And I'll tell that to anybody, and especially the ones that are saying it's awful.
Yeah.
But it is the best job I've ever had. So many opportunities for any new person looking to come into law enforcement. Said, yeah, I really don't want to be a beat cop for 30 years. There are so many opportunities, different phases of the job, specialties, assignments. If you're in a larger agency, you can move around a bit. I had the opportunity to go to the FBI Academy, stayed 3 months at Quantico. What a life-changing experience that
Yeah,
was.
let's talk about that, because I know some folks that have gone through that, and they're like they're nudging me, right? They're like, "Hey, if you have the opportunity, you should go." And my agency is very supportive. However, I'm like, "Man, I got a young daughter, and 3 months, that's a long time."
Yeah, it is. My sons were 6 and 8 when I went, and I
Hmm.
came back in the middle to visit. Um, but yeah, it is a long time. The advantage was to the guys on the East Coast that got to visit their families. Some went home like almost every weekend. But yeah, what a great experience. They break it up into physical fitness. You take a full University of Virginia curriculum, and then the socialization among international law enforcement executives. So, yeah, I mean, I've really taken advantage. I got to go to Harvard for a month under PERF's Senior Management Institute program for police. Um, I've been Raiders and sat on interviews in New Orleans and Dallas and
Mm,
Baltimore and Columbus, Ohio, and really got to see the country when I probably wouldn't have on my own. So,
yeah,
and then really got to work with just fantastic people and people that are saving lives every day. And if you're a cop and you don't believe you've saved a life, I bet you have. I bet you've saved dozens.
I agree. I fully agree.
Yeah, by what you do, by your proactive work. And I really hope that we're going to see a swing upwards into more proactive work again. I think 2020 was a real time to damper any kind of incentive to get out of the radio car and do something on your own. So it seems right now that agencies are so short, cops are running from run to run to run. Maybe don't have the opportunity to get out and do proactive work, but
Hmm.
I'm hoping we see some real changes in the next 2 to 5 years.
Yeah, I think we will. I mean, we see a lot of the legislation all across the country shifting back. We even talked about that, um, on the West Coast before we started the recording. But I think that's such an impactful thing where you you spoke on so many different factors that I do think are key, right? And before I move on, am I hearing that you went to Harvard? I, I'm pretty sure I heard you
It,
attended Harvard
it's a 3.5 week school at the Kennedy School at Harvard.
and you graduated, yeah?
I
So you're
graduated with my certificate in 3 weeks.
you're a
Yeah,
Harvard graduate. We should have
yeah,
led with that. We should have led with
yeah,
that.
right, right. I see some of my colleagues who put that on their LinkedIn page that Harvard is part of their educational background.
You know, it
I
is.
can't I can't bring myself to doing it.
It's not false, but you may say that that is a little deceptive. If
Yeah.
you put it like front and center, first line. No, I just wanted to poke at that a little bit, but that's super awesome. I love the recognition that, hey, your law enforcement career can be so many things, and a lot of people recognize that, right? With literal assignments, but hey, that's one thing I feel super grateful for in being in this social media, podcast, internet space is that it's allowed me to connect with folks like you and really glean that leadership, really glean that mentorship on a different level. And that's a lot of what this podcast interview is about. Like, I've been able to chat with you and connect with you and hit you up, but to bring that to so many other people, I just knew that was going to be so beneficial. Um, even at the earlier part of what you were starting to discuss was where you're at in life and what you're doing to stay busy. And what it sounds like when you talk about wellness, it's just living life. You're talking about relationships, you're talking about your dog, you're talking about golfing. Like, these are all super critical things that should be just a foundational part of all of our lives. Now, with all that said, and where you are now, were there times in your career where wellness took a backseat, and what were some hacks for you to kind of recognize and readjust? Because that's certainly something I've shared in myself, and I know that I'm essentially halfway there, and so I'm really trying to pay note to individuals such as yourself that have made it, quote unquote, like you've made it through your career and you're still thriving and doing life in this exemplary way.
Well, I don't know if I'm an exemplary role model in nutrition and fitness, but I think I'm in better shape now than probably my last few years on the job, especially when you get to those positions where you've got a lot of responsibility, you're constantly moving, you're eating on the run. I know midnight officers sometimes have like zero options to
Mm-hmm.
grab a bite. So you got to bring your food. And if you don't, then you're out of luck. And so the job itself can be an obstacle to good nutrition and fitness. And the other kinds of expansions in reading a book or doing something, with your family. So those hurdles came quick for me. Post shooting, I really struggled, and I really took 2 weeks. I hurt my knee wrestling with this guy before the shootout, and I was off. And in that time, it was time for reflection to see if I really wanted to come back and be a cop again. I mean,
Mm.
it was against my faith, right? Number one, thou shalt not kill.
Yeah.
And I had two young kids at home, 1 and 3, and I couldn't help but think what life would have been like if things had worked out the other way for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I struggled with that for probably about those 2 weeks. We have mandatory psychologist meetings, go back to the range, get comfortable with your weapon again. And then they tell you, come on back to work. And I did, and never looked back. I've talked to experts in the field on my show, and I was talking to these two detectives from San Diego PD who were talking about the benefits of EMDR. And it's in therapy, it can help you with those really critical moments and work it out. And we were talking, and one of them goes, you could use EMDR. I said, you think? He goes, yeah, you mentioned that shooting like twice already. We've been
Mm-hmm.
talking for 20 minutes. So I got to get in. I got to get in there and see what that's like. And yeah, I did have the problems sleeping. Didn't get into alcohol too much, but back then in the 80s, that was sort of the given that you go to a bar, hang out with your friends afterwards, and have a beer and talk it out there, not so formally. And so, yeah, my biggest lapses were then, and then promoting up and with all the different roles and responsibilities, not having time to take time. I really didn't start to see the advantage until I was coaching my boys in baseball and soccer and basketball, and tried to get into it with them as well. So yeah, I think it's so important, especially you don't have to be a bodybuilder to be a cop, but you should be in pretty good physical shape
Mm-hmm.
to handle the demands of the job. And then mentally, you've got to figure out a time to take time for yourself, take time with your relationships. Otherwise, they will suffer as a result of neglect.
Yeah, I think you put it well, right? You don't have to be like the ultimate specimen. We work alongside some of them, but I think that you have to do what you can, right? If you come in every day or every other day, right? Because some days are crazy, but if weekly you know that you're doing the right things to make yourself slightly better, right? And I think that if fitness isn't really well dialed in, right, then your training can get you closer. And if your training's not really dialed in, then fitness can kind of make up the gap, right? So it's if we are doing the responsible things, and not to shame anybody, but to nudge everyone and recognize, hey, there are things that we could be doing like a little bit better. And that might even be making sure that when you go to in-service training, you are not distracted, you're not goofing off, you're really plugged in, and you're looking for those extra opportunities. Because more often than not, I would wager if you talk to any trainer, they would say, yes, I would be absolutely ecstatic, happy to stay late, come in early, meet on some time, like set aside a little bit of time to get some extra reps for, this officer or a couple of officers. I mean, that is the stuff for trainers. And too often you hear trainers that just say people don't want to show up, even when they say, hey, we will be here every week at such and such time, such and such location, right? Um, but even I want to rewind back, you're talking about your OIS, and I don't mean to bring you down that road because these can be traumatic to talk about, but I love how you are willing to recognize the moral injury that came in, right? We sign up for this job. We're told pretty outwardly, hey, you might have to take someone's life. You might have to, and you have to risk your own life at times. But it was very different still, you knowing that, but then when you had to actually resort to that deadly force, um, what do you recall about that, and what helped you grapple with that in, as you said, the 2 weeks kind of post shoot?
Yeah, well, I mean, just going backwards a little bit with you, the training is so important. And I think the reason I've done well on promotionals is because I love the training and really can take that leap where I get into it, right?
Mm,
And so all the training I did at the academy with, learning about the job and then at the range, I was never a big shooter before I came in the police department. Uh, in the actual shooting itself, I don't remember consciously drawing my gun,
mm,
but I did, and I think it saved my life. The automatic response to training, the muscle memory to training,
yeah.
the threat is there. A gunshot's fired. How do you protect yourself? You're in that fight or flight dilemma, and our job doesn't give us a lot of room to flight. So we gotta fight on. And
Hmm.
so right after the shooting, I was 100% clear. I was 100% right. The investigators, I went back to the station, and the watch commander called me into his office, asked me what happened. I told him, and came out, and I've got all these people coming by, some patting you on the back, some saying, asking you about graphic details. And then the watch commander calls me back in. And he says, pulls out his little, 2x3 card that we all carry, and he pulls it out and he starts reading me my Miranda rights.
Oh man.
And
Yeah.
I mean, it was like a slap in the face of reality, like, what? And all I could think of, he was on the phone when he was in there. All I could think of was somebody probably said, did you read him his rights, his administrative rights,
Mm,
right? And he said no. And he said, well, you call him back in and ask, read him his rights. So he pulls out his Miranda card. Now I'm a, custody and interrogation, right?
mm,
And so it sort of sobered me up and set me into a new reality. I called home. I called my wife at the time, and I said, "Hey, how's it going?" And she said, "What happened? What happened?" And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I could hear it in your voice."
mm,
So it was something I wasn't conscious of. Talked to her, told her I was fine, I was going to be okay, and then went with the homicide inspectors back to the hall. The district attorney inspector was there. They questioned me, took photos of my injuries and my, scuffed up clothing, torn shirt, and all of that. And then they take your weapon, and then you write your statement and go home. And by then it was probably 4 or 5 hours past what my normal shift would have been. So then you go home and maybe somebody will call, maybe not. Um, you go to the doctor for your follow-ups, and then, yeah, you're just in this sort of limbo. And then, for me, my sleep was definitely affected. I played the situation over in my mind 1,000 times. I mean, since then, in those 2 weeks, probably hundreds of times. Sleep was affected. I could feel being irritable, um, and just replayed it over and over again. And I kept thinking, was there something else I could have done? Was there something else I could have done? And between the threat to me and my partner, who was really in line to be shot at the time, I, I am 100% well with my decision and what happened. But I did have those anniversary thoughts, right? And they're not planned. You don't put it on the calendar, shooting anniversary, but you do have those thoughts that go back to it. And I mean, it's a significant event, and it affects anybody. If anybody says they've been in a shooting and they're 100% fine, yeah, I'd question their veracity. But to anybody, any prospective candidates out there or young police officers, rely on your training, and I think you're going to get through it. You're going to be fine. Take advantage of all things offered to you, the counseling and therapy and everything else. I think I was prepared to do that. I had a family intact. I had kids, and I had a good support system. So I think I recovered pretty well. And when I got back to work, found myself in a similar situation, like right off the bat, taking on a group of youngsters and them dropping guns on the ground and chasing them. So you don't have time to say, "Oh, I'll just ease back into it."
Yeah.
If you're going to go back into patrol, you got to be ready for it.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there, and I even want to just going back towards the beginning. There's a nugget where the process was jarring, right? And that might have been the boss kind of speaking a little miscommunication, right? Like reading Miranda, but this day and age, what year roughly was that you're shooting?
89.
Okay, yeah. So like this day and age, it probably is built into the process where you have an outside agency or an independent office looking at the quote unquote homicide case that you are now a potential suspect in. And so I don't want to go too much in the weeds, but I think it is super impactful. Whatever your agency or region's process is, there could be so much smoothed over with your union or your administration or a tag team of both saying, hey, officers, I know we haven't had a shooting for X number of years. It's not the case for my agency because of the pace, but hey, I know that this is a thing that's not super frequent, but here is the thing. We're going to talk about it maybe annually so everyone is on the same page. When we read you your rights, when you read you Garrity, when we call your attorney and said, hey, you're just going to sit here in a holding cell. I misspoke there. So it doesn't feel like a holding cell. Like, hey, you're in a room. We're going to get your union rep. We're going to get a peer support, whatever your process is. But everyone is so clear on the process that it doesn't feel quite as scary. Like, yeah, this is super stressful. It's going to be stressful. But if you know what the process is, then you know what to expect. And I think that there's a direct carryover to another point you talked about, right? And that's training, relying on your training. And absent the actual range training, because that's one piece of it, it's your experience. And absent those experiences, it's looking at the experiences of others. And that's where resources like PoliceOne, the videos, the following the news, looking at the national landscape and things that are happening, breaking it down in your little roll calls and your briefings, like those can be so instrumental just to make sure that you're dialed in and you have taken your your cognition there in this what if scenario.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And, funny, they sent me to this class after it was probably a month or so. And we had shooting specialists and lawyers and a psychologist all talking to us. And we were having drinks afterwards, and I noticed on the back of one of the pieces of literature it was sponsored by AA.
Mm, look at that.
So so because of, the propensity for overindulging in alcohol, they thought enough to help sponsor this training. And I think there's so much better training out there right now for cops. Take it, like I say, take advantage of all of it.
Yeah, I mean, alcohol, you mentioned it before and just now again, but it is such a prevalent part of law enforcement culture, first responder culture. And I think it is worth mentioning. Yeah, there needs to be an awareness, there need to be conversations about and surrounding alcohol as a mechanism, right? As a coping mechanism,
Mhm.
self-medicating. I'm glad that we're having increased conversations about this. And I do like to add the caveat for folks because sometimes it feels like an all or nothing, and that can really make people defensive. Hey, it's like anything, know thyself. Like, know your tendencies. Do you tend to rely on alcohol when it's stressful situations? And if so, then let's figure out some other mechanisms that can assist with that, right? And make sure you're monitoring, self monitoring, but also asking for like an accountability buddy. Maybe that's your partner. Maybe that's your buddy. Maybe it's your drinking buddy to say, hey, like, this is not really the intent here, right? If alcohol is a normal part of your kind of week to week, that's fine, right? And I like how certain MHPs have said that, hey, we're not looking for you to go abstinent, because you've been in a critical incident. If it's part of your normal process and it's social, it's not antisocial, right? There's all these kind of uh, I suppose gauges that you can look at and say, okay, is this within my normal range? Okay, cool. Am I becoming reliant? Okay, then if so, then I need to start having some conversations and looking at how I can better cope through this.
Yeah.
Yeah, as far as processing, you gave a lot of insights as you're talking with buddies and this and that. I think that might be a great time to bring up peer support because it came up without those terms in this conversation a couple times where just leveling with others and it's another resource. I think that it is one of the lowest hanging fruits that agencies and organizations can bring in and or support in their culture. What are your thoughts on that from having all of your experiences through the different ranks and then also looking at law enforcement as a whole in the profession?
Yeah, I love the idea of peer support groups and behavioral science groups, but I think we really need to assess anybody who wants to be in the program just as we would anything else. I mean, there is no aspect of policing where we just take all volunteers and say, okay, you're a SWAT guy because you're a volunteer. You got to go through a process. Same with an FTO, field training officer. Same with a school resource officer. And to be part of a peer support system, you have to volunteer. But I think sometimes we need to actually ask people to join because they're probably a quiet leader in their agency, maybe not the rah-rah guy in the locker room, but somebody that people respect and they go to and know they've got an answer if they can, go with them one-on-one. So I think it's got to be a little bit of both, some volunteers and some voluntolds, but the volunteers need to be vetted just like anybody else. And just to make a point, going back to my shooting, one of the guys that asked me like a graphic question about the shooting,
Mm,
afterwards I go to look at the sheet of who can I talk to peer support, and that guy's like number 3 on the list, and I went, okay, I think I'll seek elsewhere.
yeah.
So it's important that it is important when you have someone talking to somebody either pre or post crisis or just somebody who needs some direction, that you got a good person talking to them, not just somebody who says, I'll do it.
Yeah, that's so valuable. That credibility is huge. And I've talked to different agency reps reaching out to learn about our wellness programs or our peer support, and that was a conversation piece. Some people were like, "Hey, we have a peer support program actually, but I'm wary of the members and I'm wary of the cultural dynamics in my station where it becomes a gossip party and this and that." And I was like, "Well, that is a bigger issue to fix, and that has to be nipped, right? It needs to be a zero tolerance setting of expectations, even if it's a reset, right? To say, hey, this is what things have been in the past, but in recognizing where we need to go and what we need to do and how this needs to be a resource. If you are found to be loose-lipped about anything said to you in confidence, like you're 100% out. Like we cannot have that. And this is people's livelihood. This is people's lives as far as the types of stressful conversations that they're trying to unpack and process. And so that's what I would leave with folks that are trying to grapple with how to maybe initiate or even reform their peer support program.
Yeah, 100%. Once the confidence is broken, can't get it back.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask you about leadership, and you've held so many leadership ranks and roles in official capacity, and now you're a leader in the space. And I'm curious where there were leadership lessons that have stood out to you in your career uh, that helped inform the kind of energy you bring now.
Yeah, so, as a patrol officer, and I think our police leaders don't realize this enough, you're being watched all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and the moves you make are being questioned. And if you make these moves in a vacuum and just rule by fiat, you just tell them, just because I said so, y- you'll lose people right off the bat. Um, I've looked to models that I wanted to emulate because of the impression they had on me, how they talk to us, how they explain policies. I told captains all the time, look, we could have the greatest policy, but if you hand it off to the lieutenants who hand it off to the sergeants who read it line up, oh, great, here's another lame brain idea from the top, right? That they could kill your policy at that line level.
Yes.
So why not make it important? If it's important, why not explain it? This is why we're going to do it this way. If you're just throwing policy after policy out there without any sort of explanation, then people are going to make of it what they want. And so I looked to those leaders, and it worked for me to be the one. And I could hear myself when I was explaining things. And sometimes I could stop mid sentence and say, "Oh, wait a minute, maybe we're not going to do that." And I think it's really important, and not to surround yourself as a leader with an echo chamber or a bunch of people shaking their head up and down, regardless of what you say. I think you need that critic, somebody who will say, Cap, I don't know if that's going to work. Can we talk about this? I love those people. And I had the greatest sergeants who would come up and say, I'm having trouble getting this to the guys because there's some real issues here. And I always took that to heart. And I'll tell you real quick, this one incident that I had when I was that brand new commander, 41-year-old commander, telling a 60-year-old captain at a demonstration protest that we weren't going to do something that he wanted to do. He squawked back at me. And
Mm.
so here we were, the two of us arguing. There's a crowd of 300, 400 people who took over an intersection, and he wanted to go in with hats and bats. And we had two platoons with us, and we could have easily done it. But I said, wait a minute, let's talk about this. And I explained it. And then he, the body language, I'm sure, was apparent to everyone in those platoons standing there with
Yeah.
this backdrop of demonstrators. So I go over and I stand between the platoons, and I said, hey, look, this is what we're going to do. These guys are jumping up and down and waving flags and signs. Traffic is diverted. There is no big, massive issue to get them out of the intersection right now. We're going to let it go for another 15 minutes, 20 minutes tops. If they don't, then we're going to issue the dispersal order and get them out of there. But I don't want any cop going in there, getting on the news, hitting somebody, hurting somebody, or any of you getting hurt by them. And I might have talked for 10 minutes, 15 tops, and walked away. And of course, the crowd broke up and, dissipated. And there was done, right? No follow-up. Well, 5 years later, I'm back at a station, and we had a new chief. I got put back to captain again before my rise back to commander, deputy chief again. I'm a captain at a station, and a young officer comes up to me and he says, "Hey, do you remember that demonstration, the war protest at this location?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "We were talking about that for a long time, how you address the troops. Nobody's ever done that for us." And
Mm.
and I remember that as a patrol officer, that nobody ever took the time to explain to us what was going on. We just waited, and then we're told to hurry up and do something. So I took that to heart, and I took it to heart to say, anytime I mentored a lieutenant or a captain after that, you got to have that communication, and it's not BS. It is really valuable for you to do.
Yeah, I love that because this has come up a couple times in recent interviews where the explanation of, uh, let's say, older generation, a prior generation, and the importance of why, right, in leadership. And this is usually people reflecting that explaining the why is truly instrumental in making sure that the troops are understanding purpose and intent, and they are more likely to adapt and carry on the mission as their own personal mission because they understand the ins and outs and they have belief in it. Whereas it is a traditional sense that it's just a generational thing, and oh, like the millennials or the Z's or whoever comes after just needs to know why. But and it's I love that it can be both, right? Maybe it does help the generational divide to communicate in such a way, but really it doesn't matter. It spans across generation. Like people just want to know what they're doing and the why, and so that they can best essentially do the how, right? To
Mhm.
really carry it on. So I love that example, especially for that, because you're also kind of ahead of your time. You might look at civil disturbance kind of incidents where more and more agencies are recognizing that, yeah, just smashing in with a platoon to take back the street for what purpose, right? And then what the risk is to officers, to bystanders, right? We know it's not always the most violent people that just took an intersection. There are instigators within, and so just to recognize, yeah, even our tactics have adjusted largely just to make sure that we are serving like our ultimate goal. And sometimes when it's someone just taking an intersection, they take it and then they kind of peter out and they lose interest and they move on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so huge. And, maybe that's a perfect time to transition into. I want to ask you about innovative leadership and just being open to ideas. And I've recognized even in myself, I'm trying to make sure that I keep that. I feel like in some examples of something I've been tasked with, I brought this new energy or this new idea. Recruiting was a specific example where when I transitioned out of recruiting for my promotion, I actually think the timing was good, right? People were like, "Well, you weren't there very long." And I was like, "Well, it's good because I don't want to be stale. And the next person that comes in is going to bring their insights and their ideas and what their specific skills are to that unit." And I even have this notion with wellness, which is probably why I try to be so active on the podcast, because then I get to hear so many different perspectives in and out of the industry. The last thing I want to be is the boss that feels a certain way just because that's what worked for me and that's what worked for the industry at a certain time, and kind of tighten this vice grip on my opinions. I see you very much as someone that has succeeded in that, in how you're continually looking at the cutting edge of law enforcement. Is that something that came naturally to you, or is that something that you had to work on?
Well, I mean, you're talking about those 6 dreaded words, right? We've always done it
Yep.
this way,
Yeah.
and, that always kinda rubbed me the wrong way, especially when, there's always better ways of doing things. I think for me, I wasn't looking to be cutting edge or anything. I was just looking to see what was efficient and expedient, work for me, what I want. I think being able to put yourself in the other person's shoes and consider their perspective, I think that goes a long way. Like, how are they going to feel if tell them they've got to do this? Or, um, when you ask them to do something and they're questioning whether or not you would be doing it. So, it doesn't make sense to drive around there as a commander like you are jumping in a radio car and writing up 20 tickets so you could show the guys, "Hey, look, I'm doing it." You don't want to go to that extent, but I would make sure that even from the lieutenant's position on up, when some cops really bristled at seeing me in a radio car out on the street, that they knew I was there. And it took a while for some of them to gain the confidence to realize that I was there for them and not to catch them doing something bad.
Mm-hmm.
And every time you change assignments, you've got to earn that again. You've got to show people what you're doing and why you're doing it. I was making arrests, calling for people. They say, "Hey, we'll book the guy for you and we'll write the report for you, Cap or Lieutenant." And I'm like, "No, I got it." But to lead from the front, lead by example, but not to the point where you're just another radio car out there. But if you're saying, "Hey, I really want this area cleaned up. There's a lot of drug sales. We need to get out there." If they think it's only lip service or put you on the 2-call rule, I'll wait till he says it again before I do anything. I think if they see you out there physically doing it, I think that's a visual. And I've always been visual learning is a big part of how I learn. So I think that works with a lot of people out there, and just showing them that I'm not afraid to do it either. Um, and I did like to go to training. I remember going to schools where you had to pay money up front or maybe pay for it yourself and you never got reimbursed. And I remember a guy coming up as I'm looking at the training wall, and he says, "Why are you doing this? Who are you doing this for?" And I said, "I'm doing it for me." And again, I think if you have to study, if you're a working cop and you have to study and cram like crazy for the next promotional, you're working too hard. Be that kind of cop, and it'll come easy for you when you take that next promotional, because you're talking from experience and you're talking about how you would do it, as opposed to running and reading from a book how it should be done. And I think you've been a raider, Eric. I've been a raider, and you could tell when somebody's reading it or giving you an academic version of what should be done, other than somebody who comes in from experience and says, "Well, I've done this before and this is how I would do it." And I think that goes a long way too.
Yeah, absolutely. What I hear is a theme that you hit on earlier, which is modeling, right? Like, demonstrate what you want incorporated in your agency, demonstrate the values, demonstrate the actions, lead from the front. But I love how you recognize the balance, right? You could be out there, and essentially, uh, if you end up being a glorified patrol cop, in your day to day, then you are letting a lot of things slide. A lot of your obligations and responsibilities and tasks and projects. I mean, that's not your job, but there is certainly a balance, and I think everyone's going to be a little different based on maybe their own drive, their own interests, and their own talents. Where, yeah, I also recognize, like, there's some administrators who talked to me and said, "Hey, I recognize if I show up, I'm so removed that I'm going to gum it up." But there's a way to toggle that, right? Like, maybe you're not trying to be something you're not, but maybe you hop in with the patrol stars, right? And you can be a backup, you can be this or that. But I think that you hit on another key point, which is to do it in such a way that it is building trust, and maybe with a little bit of frequency, a little bit of this isn't just a novel, once a year. Then people recognize that your goal is not to just observe and jam them up. It is to be an asset. It is to be relational, and all the things that you spoke on.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember brand new lieutenant, I get to line up, and I've got a group of about a dozen older guys, because they're day watch guys at this old station. And I give the lineup briefing. I go back to my office, and I hear I hear one guy say something. I hear everybody start to laugh. And I was like, "Gosh darn it." Right. So what do I do? So I see the guy after lineup, another half hour later, and I call him into my office and I go, "Hey man, come on, help me out. It's my first day." He says, "First of all, Lieutenant, you still have the price tag up on your epaulette of your jacket there."
Mm.
And he said, "When you walked away," he said, "I said, 'Jesus Christ, I got underwear older than that guy.'" And so I
Ouch.
took it for what it was. But I made inroads with that guy, and he and I became really good friends. We rode along together, and it was that sort of, I wouldn't say I used them for gaining intel on the rest of the watch, but he was one of those quiet leaders that everybody took a cue from. And so it was really important to hear what he was saying and, take it, not be so repulsed by it that, you get defensive by it, that you've got to sort of like understand what he's talking about. And it was just a joke. And at the time, I think I was like 35, a brand new 35-year-old lieutenant, and he was probably in his 60s already or late 50s.
Yeah, yeah, that is young, especially when you consider how far back that is. But I love that because I think it's wise, right? You identify alliances and not to be manipulative, no, but just to have a finger on the pulse. And if your goal is to build team and camaraderie and unification in the mission, then absolutely you need to be recognizing of the people and the personalities and build a relationship, which it sounds like that's exactly what you did.
Yeah, good guy too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious where you started lecturing, where you started getting involved in the academic space with criminal justice, because I think that's an extremely noble effort. It is a little bit of this maybe in my horizon. I think that could be an excellent way to round out my career or even a follow-up career to engage in that next generation of law enforcement professionals, criminal justice professionals. I don't think that there's a lot of things more noble than mentorship in this industry.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I think too many great experienced cops retire, walk off the job, and never look back, and we lose so many valuable years of experience and just great intelligence, right? Not that they've got that we've always done it this way mentality, but that they could see where, why keep beating ourselves against the wall and trying the same things over and over again with no results? They'll give you that experience. But I started teaching probably about midway through my career at the police academy, and then after my investigative background, I started teaching investigative problem solving to new inspectors through California Post, the Presley School of Investigations. And then I did a couple of seminars on starting up your own school resource officer program. We reinvigorated our program when I was there, and I really liked it. And yeah, you get the people who sit in the back of the class. Cops can be really surly and they don't want to be there if it's a mandated class. But I think again, when you include them in asking them questions and getting feedback, and then being able to discuss rather than hit a wall between you and them, then that's a really good experience. And then 2 years before I retired, we held a symposium. I got some professors from our local university to sit on a panel to talk about some academic approaches to criminal justice. It was just starting out on the look into evidence-based policing. And after the program, the chair of the school said, "Hey, what are you going to do when you retire?" And I knew I wanted to do something. I didn't want to carry a gun in my next assignment. Didn't want to just go to another agency. And I said, "Why don't you come teach? We'll give you 2 classes, 2 days a week, and you'll still be semi-retired." And so I retired, I think, on January 13th, and I was teaching on January 23rd. So I had a
Oh
10-day
wow.
retirement,
Yeah.
and I started from scratch. They gave me essentially outlines to the uh, classes I was teaching, and gave me the freedom to create my own syllabus and 16 weeks of 2 days a week lectures on it. And so I love teaching police and public policy because, as you know, there's so much awful legislation out there that you wonder if lawmakers really do hear from, ground level police to say, is this thing going to work or not? And it just seems that since 2020, there have been so many examples of bad legislation that actually gets unintended consequences of what they intend, that it's really an exciting time to be teaching young people. I think I counted up the other day, something like 3,500 students in my 10-year career
Wow.
there. And so many of them come back, say, I'm in the academy now, or I'm taking the oral boards. What should I do? Can you write a letter for me for this? And they don't always turn out to be cops or deputies. Some of them go into ancillary, um, therapy or youth programs or counseling or what have you. And all of it's good. And so I do my best. And I tell students at the beginning of the year, I'm happy to mentor any of you, but you got to meet me halfway. Don't ask me for a letter where I ask you to send me a picture of yourself because I don't remember who you are.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I won't do that. If I don't remember who the person is, I won't write the letter. So, um, I really enjoy it. It gets me. I'm still a member of PERF, IACP, FBI National Academy Associates. I go to conferences. I've presented at conferences with some of my colleagues. Janae Gasparini is a cop in New York and also a professor, and we taught about university level pedagogy in field training and university level pedagogy in attracting new candidates. And I think there's something to that. And I was really disappointed to see a recent presentation on recruiting and retention, and they never mentioned the approach that we should be taking with today's candidates. And it's different than in the past, and we need to adjust. And we're actually writing a book to address all that. And I think it'll be really valuable for agencies that are struggling to communicate with younger people and to get them to sign up for their agency. I think it's going to be some good information there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, what a wealth of information. And I suppose a good place to end it, as we've discussed so many ins and outs of leadership as they come in. But what note would you leave for those coming into the career, and what note would you leave for those that are in it and maybe they're mid-career, maybe they're towards the end, especially from your insights, and maybe they're the same, maybe it's the same advice.
Yeah, well, I think it's a little bit different, and I would address the folks leaving first. The folks leaving first, I would say, take a good look and think about it before you tell somebody the reasons not to join law enforcement. Think about your career. Think about the lives that you indeed have saved through your efforts and why you got into the profession to begin with. Don't let the external influences, the narrative from people who never want cops, don't let them set your thought process and your mood, and go out with your head up and give back. Talk to somebody, talk to your local universities, and come back and be a guest lecturer or collaborate on an article about something from your experience, because we could all benefit from it. And thank you for the work that you've done, and good luck in your future endeavors. And to the young people, I would say it's not for everyone, but it is a great experience if you give yourself to it. And you will have experiences, you will have opportunities, and you should take advantage of all those. And if you do, and you listen to the training and you immerse yourself in it, you're going to be safe. You're going to be okay. Um, we're going through a time of bad legislation and maybe some negative influence on the industry, but I really see a change in the next year or two or three, and you're going to see more people saying, "Hey, we need to support cops." We saw what happened when we pulled the rug out from under them. We saw rises in crime and really awful things that happened. And now's a great opportunity. It's almost like a new frontier in some respects. So at least take a look and find out more. And if you're sitting on the fence, uh, take the time to go to some of the pre-training opportunities for physical fitness, or taking a written test or an oral board, and then jump into it. Try it. And if you have a problem and you say, "Hey, I really regret doing it," then call me. Otherwise, you can buy me a beer next time I see you.
Yeah, I love it. You've covered such an expanse, and these are themes I love to hit on, right? Whether you have 3 years or 30 years, thank you for your service. If you did it with the upright values and character traits that we see so much in our industry of the men and women that we serve alongside. Like, thank you. At the same time, we can all be here by choice. No one's making you do this. And I think that that is really empowering when you say, hey, like, go out with your head held high. You didn't paint the circumstances, but you get to do with your conviction, you get to bring what you want into the job and how you do it the best you can. And certainly so many takeaways for the young ones to focus in on everything they can control, which is to put their best feet forward, delve into all these different circumstances, all these different trainings and opportunities to be the best they can.
Yeah, for sure. It is a noble profession.
Yeah, I appreciate so much your time, DC. You're the OG police influencer. So I just want to thank you so much for your discussions on leadership, the way you model being a optimist and a positive police leader that's so relevant, even in your fake retirement, as I call it, which I love. I love the fake retirement because you got a smile on your face, you're bright eyed, and certainly have so much more to give. So thank you so much for sharing that with us today.
Hey, thanks, Eric. You are the next generation of leadership. Proud to know you and really enjoyed working with you on the webinar and look forward to future projects with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, sir. And where can folks find you on social media or online?
Yeah, so the Policing Matters podcast is found on any podcast medium. We have an Instagram. I have an Instagram called Policing Matters Podcast. And you can look for my articles on PoliceOne. And what else? I'm teaching. If you're interested in getting your bachelor's degree, finishing your bachelor's, come see me at San Francisco State. We also have an online cohort as well.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you again, sir. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Eric. Take good care.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.